Hello, welcome to the Cannabis Industry News Show from Vault Fast, where Katya and I get you up to date with all the relevant news that's taking place in the UK and Europe. Hello, Katya. Thank you for joining us. I have to
Hello,
say
and
joining us, really, because we do this together, don't we? I'm
yeah,
joining you as well.
I'm the
How are we
guest.
doing?
I'm the guest. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
You ain't no
Yeah,
guest.
I am no guest. Yeah, good to be here. Lots of news to chat through as usual. Bit of international news as well. Lots going on in the UK.
Yeah.
Should we jump straight into it?
Let's jump straight in. Let's jump straight in
Yeah,
with medical
not
cannabis
wasting.
patients and the
Yeah,
police.
not wasting anyone's time.
Straight in.
So yeah, there's been more kind of updates and press stories around medical cannabis patients and police interactions. So I think a couple of weeks ago we talked about it on the podcast. The Guardian did a kind of call for evidence and stories from patients around how what their interactions have been like with the police and whether there's been any problems. And Matha Busby's piece came out in the Guardian a couple of days ago, which I think is the kind of culmination of all this evidence and all that's kind of come to fruition. And yeah, it's highlighted how how important police engagement is on this issue, and there's still clearly a lot of work to be done with legal cannabis patients just having their prescriptions confiscated and the police just not actually understanding the law and the legislation. And similarly, Jason Reed had a piece come out in iNews highlighting a very kind of similar narrative. And yeah, both really just show that patients are still very much in the crossfire with the law. And yeah, I think an important narrative to continue to highlight. And something quite relevant, I guess, with the industry as well, as I think these narratives show the kind of tension point that sits with a lot of the different card schemes that exist in the industry. As I think from the industry perspective, we understand and know what the purpose of these cards are, but I think to outsiders like the police and other third parties, I think it might just create a bit more confusion and even less clarity. Um,
Definitely.
yeah,
It's shameful, really, that this is going on, that people with completely valid prescriptions are being harassed more than harassed by the police. That's a really shameful situation to be in. And there's clearly an ongoing need, isn't there, to engage with those services, police in particular, and just educate them kindly, positively on medical cannabis access. It's it's such an
yeah. I
awful
think in
situation
cases
to be
like this, Yeah, I think in cases like this, you just want to make it as simple as possible. And I feel like the cannabis industry, in general, we have a tendency towards just overcomplicating everything. And
in.
I
Yeah,
think in this case, it's just easy to be like, the law was changed 5 years ago. This is what a legal cannabis prescription
yeah,
looks like. This is how to figure out if a patient's legit. These are the conditions that it can be prescribed for, and just give a medical cannabis 101. But yeah, good to see that mainstream media are picking up on this and see it as a an important issue, which it is.
yeah. And it should be something that's continue to talk about and raise. And I hope that there are initiatives afoot to do a more effective job of training the police. I know there's a bunch of organisations who've done some great work to date engaging with the police and educating them, but this shows that there's a lot more to do, isn't there? There's more work to be done and more people to be engaged to get the message off to the police and patients as well. I think it's important for clinics to speak directly to patients and say, look, this is the legality around the possession of your prescription. This is how you are allowed to use it. This is how you're not allowed to use it. If you are asked or there's an interaction with the police, here's what you can do. Just do everything
Yeah.
we can to make it easy. But yeah, I mean, Cardgate, I'm sure we'll keep touching on. Um,
Cardgate. It's
probably
one of our continual themes on the industry show.
we were joking, weren't we? Like at events, does the industry need cards? Panel. It's like a massive debate. Anyway, it's good. Yeah,
Yeah.
good journalism all round, I think. There. We also had last week March of the Unicorns, which was MedcanFamily Foundation's campaign, Save the Unicorn. Long planned, long been discussed. It was a march that took place in London where they marched to Parliament to raise awareness of inequality of access to cannabis-based medicines for children who were suffering from severe forms of epilepsy. Katya and I were there in the House of Lords for the event. great, really well attended, really
Yeah.
good engagement. It's kind of goes without saying, doesn't it? Really, it's like the most obvious thing in the world to say, but again, a bit like the last story, it's frustrating to be in this situation years and years and years down the line from medical cannabis laws changing in 2018. But there is an ask there from Hannah and the Medcan team and Matt for the government to put aside a pot of money which could fund the children's prescriptions, which we've talked about an APPG level with politicians. There's ongoing discussions around the possibility of that, which I think we feel is a very fair, sensible, practical ask. I know it's difficult getting money out of government at the best of times, but this wouldn't be a vast sum of money in the grand scheme of government spending, and it would go a long
Yeah.
way to
It
changing
would,
the
and
world.
it would be for when we're looking at like from like a population level, it would be a very small population that it would be addressing, but it would go a really long way.
Yeah, so there's good representation there, good representation from the APPG. I think everyone's realistic and understands the challenges of engaging government on this. It's not like it's the first discussion that's tried to take place with government since 2018. There's been persistent engagement and discussions around this cohort of children and what they need. And we know all too well the challenges of having that conversation, particularly in just the wild news cycle that we continue to be in. We're still in this like crazy, never-ending, bizarre news cycle, not just in the UK, but less bizarre,
Mm.
but globally. And it's so difficult to get the attention of politicians and maintain it and have them apply themselves on an issue like this. I think catch a lot of the work we've talked about and a lot of the work that we're doing in collaboration with Hannah and the MCCS crew that we share the secretariat position with the APPG. We feel like there is movement to be made, and it seems like the best way to do that at the moment is kind of that events like this where you bring those key people into the room and just advocate and engage with them and see what they can do behind the scenes, the conversations that can create, the momentum they can build to just
Mm.
create a fairer system. Because that it's been said so many times by so many different people, but the reason cannabis was legalized in 2018 was for these stories, and there's still issues, still an unresolved issue, it's still a problem.
Yeah, it's still a massive problem, and it's the same story and the same narrative, and it's just
Yeah,
so frustrating that we're all kind of still in this situation. But I guess on that note as well, there is there is positive engagement and chat around this issue more generally, like with the BPNA had their annual meeting a few weeks ago, and Hannah Deacon and Tanya Antoniazzi, representatives like from the APPG, went and were sat around the table, and I think that's by far one of the most challenging groups that's been engaged on this issue. So it's good to see that there's engagement and relationships forming there.
yeah, yeah. That's
Mhm.
quite an interesting development, isn't it? That
Yeah,
meeting taking place.
yeah, and I think it shows that like it's not just about political engagement. It's almost like
Mm.
building alliances with groups that are also close to government. Like I think a lot of these healthcare charities have good ways in, so it's pushing the right buttons. Um,
But well done to Hannah and the Medcan team and Matt. The work you guys do is absolutely amazing.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
relentless, and we appreciate you massively and share your frustrations and drive to change that landscape to help those kids.
yeah. It was really, yeah, really job well done, and I liked the framing with all the unicorns and yeah, and all the costumes. The unicorn outfits looked like quite a good way to shield themselves from the rain as well. I felt that.
Yeah, yeah, bless them,
um,
absolute warriors.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess on to the next story, which is not really cannabis industry related at all, but one that's definitely worth mentioning from a drug policy news point of view. Transform have launched their How to Regulate Psychedelics report as of last week, around how psychedelics can be regulated from like a recreational point of view. Very comprehensive report, all 124 pages of it. Yeah, it's quite the chunk of reading. And yeah, just I thought it was really good to see a narrative that's not just like the medicalization of psychedelics, and pushing forward and discussing how these compounds can be regulated for recreational use, not just having to need a diagnosis of something to use it. And yeah, they've put forward a bunch of different models of regulation, some of which are kind of similar to cannabis social clubs and things that already exist for cannabis. Yeah, I think yeah, really really interesting report. Nothing like it really exists in the sector. And yeah, I guess it is always like with the report they published on stimulants like 3 years ago or so. It's definitely like a big step from where we are now in like the reality of drug policy and where reform currently stands. And I think we're definitely only kind of at the beginning of getting the conversation with like medical psychedelics. But yeah, I think that's kind of something that Transform always do really well, is they kind of look further down the line and look at like, okay, so like if we were in like a in a drug policy heaven, like how would we regulate all of this, how would all of this look like? And yeah, their work on stimulants is very similar. So
Yeah, good,
yeah,
really important. We were saying what a really important thing for a group to be doing is kind of pushing ahead and laying the groundwork for policy to then be discussed at a
at
later
a later
stage. And,
date.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
And it
psychedelics is interesting, isn't it? Come.
no, yeah, I was literally about to say the same thing. You continue.
Yeah, they're just an interesting case study out there. They're quite, I guess, the demographics that use them on the illicit market. There are some strong differences from other substances, and I guess the legal market would naturally feel quite different in terms of the cohorts that are using it from a cannabis market.
Yeah.
It's quite, I mean, I've always been of the belief that you do have to treat drugs very, very differently when it comes to legalizing and regulating them. I think it's lazy to just lump everything in and be like, we should legalize all drugs. And it's like, well,
Yeah,
what does
it's
that
like
look
let's
like?
regulate it all like alcohol,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
like this
Like,
way.
it's very
So
messy.
I think my kind of I don't have any evidence to back this up whatsoever. This is purely my
These are the
opinion.
best opinions. These are my favorites. Go on.
But I do just have this gut feeling that if we were to like legalize psychedelics tomorrow for recreational purposes and follow one of the models that Transform have proposed, I do feel like the competition with the illicit market would just be so different to what we see with like cocaine and cannabis and MDMA, because I think psychedelics like aren't really that like mainstream in terms of who uses them. Like, you know, loads more people kind of do cocaine or cannabis on a
Yeah,
regular
yeah,
basis.
definitely.
So I feel like my gut feeling is that like an illicit market competition would be diminished quite quickly. But again, that is like just purely my opinion and could be completely false, but it's just what I think.
Just gut feelings are great. I think a lot of great opinions are formed on just like inclinations. Yeah, I think in many ways it'd probably be a far easier model of regulation to get through and discuss and get public support from than cannabis. Like cannabis is
Yeah.
riddled with stigma and complexity, and you know you're
Yeah.
battling a lot.
Plus,
Go on.
yeah, plus with psychedelics, like there's so much research to show that like psychedelics are like anti-addictive. Like you can't do psychedelics every single day because like your brain builds up this massive tolerance. So from like an illicit market point of view, I feel like psychedelics like aren't even like a dealer's like top seller, because like someone has like an acid trip for like a week.
Yeah,
So I feel like from that point of view, there's not this like competition and push for like cannabis and cocaine where users can use that quite regularly.
yeah, agree.
But yeah, no, good job to
Good
the
work.
Transform
Yeah,
team.
good work, Transform. I'll take the next one.
Yeah.
Germany's really interesting, isn't it? We've had loads of really, I guess, high hopes about Germany, and it's something we've talked about quite a lot on the show, or just like videos that we've done on YouTube, written articles about, spoken to people in the industry. There's been a lot of conversation around Germany and what that is going to look like. Me and Alfredo did a show not so long ago discussing it, and we're going to do one again in the new year when now this stuff is all becoming a little bit clearer. I guess there is some frustrations with Germany, and it does look like the law that was set to be introduced is going to be delayed, and they're facing some setbacks. And the bill's essentially the phase of essentially been split into two. The second phase, I think, is a phase that particularly people in the industry are really quite interested in. That's the phase and the element which will see these kind of pilots set up, these model cities, where cannabis will be sold in licensed shops. We've talked on the show, and again, multiple different types of content, just around how that model doesn't look that great. It looks like quite a restrictive pilot scheme. The locations of the building and the licensed shops have to be really spread out because of their fears of them being near schools and all sorts of other places. So you end up with this like quite scattered model, and it's a pilot scheme, so it's quite restrictive in terms of what the whole landscape looks like and how innovative it is. And so I remember kind of looking at the second phase, which is not, we don't have a date for. Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of Canada, when I went to Canada when they'd first legalized, and I spoke to a lot of people that were using cannabis, and they said that the problem is the shops were just all so far away and it was so scattered that they were just still going to the dealers. So they were just like, the shop's like a 40-minute walk when I can just text someone who I know that turns up. So the second phase is something we will keep an eye on and we'll discuss further down the line. And I think our criticism of that is that it's exciting and it's going to be a very good thing to look at and interesting for the industry. But ultimately, if this wants to be successful, then it needs to be marketed and sold in a way that is a strong enough model to eliminate the illicit market. And just what we've seen so far, there's definitely some concerns there. But we're going to pick that up and we're going to talk to Alfredo about it down the line. The first phase was the possession of weed to be decriminalized of up to 25 grams to allow adults to grow 3 cannabis plants at their own home. And this kind of establishment of the non-for-profit members clubs, like the social club model that we talked about. So that phase is the first phase that we're going to look at, but it keeps getting knocked back, and it looks like it's not going to be brought into force until early next year, which is, I guess time's flying fast at the moment, and we always say, oh my God, I can't believe it's in the year. Like, it's not like time's going slow. Time is going really fast, but I think it's interesting to see just some of the kickbacks that have started to occur there. So what you've seen in the Bundestag is, people starting to push back on what that reform looks like, and like addiction experts, lawyers, judges, medical associations, kind of weighing in and discussing some of that controversy. So I think it's not that we're skeptical of Germany. I think Germany's a really, really interesting case study in Europe. It's, as we've talked about multiple times, there's five countries that border Germany. So their changing legislation is going to have a knock-on effect across the EU. And it's definitely exciting, but we're starting to see what in real time some of the challenges of implementing a cannabis model when you kind of have a political process which is quite clunky. If you compare it to Trudeau's Canada, he was like, I'm going to legalize cannabis, it's going to look like this, and when we're in, we're going to do it. And he came in, boom,
Just
they
did
went
it.
for it,
Yeah,
and they kind of went for it. They were very clear what they wanted to do. Whereas Germany, it just feels a little bit more clunky, and it feels like they're stepping back a lot on what their original plans were. Now
yeah, because they're
phases.
originally they were like it's going to be full commercial
Oh
model,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it was announced in like I want to say this time 2 years ago. I think
yeah.
end of 2021 was when Germany first kind of made its announcements, and it's crazy. It's been like 2 years, and we're it's still in the process of discussing kind of what it looks like, and that model has changed significantly in 2 years. So
Yeah. It's
um,
difficult. It's very. I think if you don't go in with a really strong vision for a commercial model, and you went through a process like this, you're always going to get pushback. And I think this is maybe a subject and a discussion for another time. Maybe we pick this up in another forum or remit. But the public health lobby is so strong. It's such a powerful lobby and a powerful force to contend with, that if you don't go in with a really strong model and hold your ground and push it through, then you very quickly end up in conversations which are around. In fact, they're kind of like conversations that are riddled with stigma, really.
hmm,
What about kids? What message does this send? What about marketing? And it becomes this very kind of restrictive, scared,
just trying
cautious
to put
model.
cannabis in a box and just like
Yeah, like,
keep it
whoa.
out of the mainstream and in its own little kind of like counterculture box, really.
Yeah,
Instead, you know legalizing cannabis and bringing it into the mainstream is about like normalizing it and being like look at all these
Totally.
people that use
Yeah.
cannabis and they're
Yeah.
completely normal contributing members of society.
Yeah.
And I think it does in many ways kind of just continue that domino effect of stigma.
Big time. We end up creating these models and ideas and systems that are just completely unnecessary because they're based on fear. And again, the fundamental point, the most crucial point in any discussion around regulated markets and legalization is you must defeat the illicit market. If you are not putting a model forward which will decrease the illicit market,
What's the
and
point?
why bother?
Like,
Like, I mean, decriminalization, sure. There's loads of sensible arguments for decriminalization, criminalization of people for using cannabis. For all the evidence suggests is a completely pointless activity. That it's not that. But if you want to change the landscape and stop gangs making money, and you want to move this into a regulated, innovative, science-based, consumer-based, exciting industry, you must approach the conversation as a capitalist and an economist, and you must say, how do we create a market which people choose to engage with because their experience of it is good? And you don't get to that conclusion if you go, how do we create a model which best protects people from harm? Because then you
yeah.
end up with a model which is really cautious, and your model just doesn't defeat the illicit market. So the whole thing just becomes a
Yeah.
bit of a fruit.
And it just addresses one moral pillar of the whole
Yeah, yeah,
argument, and
yeah.
doesn't engage, right wing libertarian frames.
Exactly. It's just a
Um,
left wing frame of don't hurt people. And then you end up with
yeah.
these kind of public health, dry, boring models. Anyway, we're getting off the point. But basically,
Anyways,
Germany is facing some challenges. It looks like there's a delay. It might not be until February, like February, March 2024. We're going to pick this conversation up with Alfredo, likely in the new year or back end of next month, to get some more information and sort of analysis from him around what that could mean. But if you go back and watch some of the stuff that me and Alfredo have talked about before, it's on YouTube. We kind of talk about that stigma point in a lot of detail and express our frustrations with that kind of public health clunky model. But yeah, disappointing from Germany. We're still excited for it. Still interesting. It's still a hotbed of drug policy, cannabis policy development in Europe. But we should rightly be cautious, particularly around that second phase, which we're going to see start to be discussed in the near future.
definitely.
Europe,
Another development in Europe, Ukraine,
yeah,
of all places.
Ukraine. Ukraine, Zelensky's kind of come out, hasn't he, and spoken about this a few times now about he's talked about it as kind of like a need for them to change their cannabis laws and legalize out of what is, from my perspective, a very reasonable, smart observation is
Yeah,
that
around
cannabis,
veterans. Yeah.
yeah, veterans, cannabis as a drug is incredible for people who've experienced trauma. And I'm not making a medical claim here, by the way, before I get in trouble from.
We're not doctors.
Yeah, the evidence that I've seen would suggest that cannabis can play a superb role in managing various ailments and issues off the back of someone serving in war. The psychological trauma and horror associated with war. It can help psychologically, physically. There's tons of evidence around the benefits that cannabis can have in managing pain. So a country that is at active war, what was the estimation? It's like 10% of their 10% of Ukraine's population are participating in the war against
It's a
Russia.
massive cohort that could,
That's a huge cohort of
yeah.
people.
And it's a really interesting frame to be used because that was what kind of got the bill through in loads of states in the US, for medical use of cannabis. So I think it's interesting that that's being reused, and I think Ukraine could be quite an interesting case study because like veterans and kind of engagement with veterans is definitely like still a difficult to engage group in the UK. I know there's great work happening with like heroic hearts, and work being done with veterans associations, but I think still that like stigma is really strong. So hopefully some interesting stuff that we can learn from Ukraine
Yeah,
in
we don't
regards to
talk about that
this.
enough, do we?
No.
In the UK, like there's just we don't. I think we're proud of our military. It's not like we're anti-military. Well, some groups of society are anti-military, but we don't have that level of like pride that exists in North America. Like the veterans movement was so strong.
Yeah.
We don't really explore that enough, do we, in the UK?
Yeah. But
But
yeah, Ukraine one to watch. You know,
Yeah, one to watch.
maybe
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, definitely part of the wild news cycle. But if we can get medical cannabis in there somehow, it's positive.
yeah. I
Um,
agree with that, mate. Don't disagree.
Yeah, and then next piece of news is the Center for Medicinal Cannabis, the CMC, have rebranded to the Medical Cannabis Alliance, the MCA. And yeah, we attended their rebrand meeting, and they've kind of set out their position with the industry. Yeah, I think a lot of what they kind of care about and hold close to them, I don't think will kind of come as a surprise. One thing we know that they care really deeply about is regulation in the industry, and they've been quite open in their last kind of few meetings and gatherings around their worries around how some clinics are marketing and advertising their products and where the line of legality stands. So yeah, I think we can expect to see a lot more from the MCA in the coming months, I would imagine, and what their kind of plans and projects will look like for the industry. So yeah,
It's an interesting
one to
discussion and
watch.
debate, isn't it, around how clinics should market and the tension point that exists there. There's definitely clinics which are who are pushing a more recreational focus. We've seen a clinic on the last show hire an influencer musician, Big Nasty, someone who's probably got one of the strongest sort of like recreational cannabis brands, like you know what I mean,
In
as
the
in like
UK.
him as an individual in the country. So definitely kind of exploring that rec focus. We've seen new clinics kind of start up with quite a rec
Yeah.
focus
And
is the wrong phrase in there, but an
it's their
understanding of
branding.
blurring between the two and their branding kind of
Yeah.
focused on.
So it's an interesting kind of moral dilemma, like where, I guess, we're very pro just, increasing patient numbers and building the industry and having more patients benefit from cannabis medicines. But I guess it just depends you know, where people sit around, pushing a bit of like a rec association when it's medical for like the betterment of the industry. Like, is that okay?
It's a
So
good debate. It's a good discussion to have,
yeah, good debate and
and yeah,
discussion, and one will continue to have, I'm sure.
yeah, definitely.
um, and then the last piece of news is around consumption lounges for cannabis patients. So there's been kind of two pieces of coverage over the last like week or so around this. One in the Manchester Evening News around a counsellor in Salford calling for there to be safe areas in the town hall for medical cannabis patients to use their medication. Really good to see stuff like that. Really important as well to just raise awareness of the legality. And similarly, there was coverage in the BBC in Northern Ireland around a legal vape lounge for medical cannabis patients. So yeah, both just good news to see coverage around this and raising awareness of legality. And this kind of lounge consumption room model is quite interesting because I know there's a lot of clinics and operators kind of looking into this actively around how how that can expand awareness and patient numbers with there being like a front room for information and even potentially a doctor on site to like potentially prescribe and kind of issue prescriptions for patients that meet the requirements.
Yeah,
So yeah,
it's
just
definitely going to
quite
be
an
a tension
interesting.
point, isn't it? It's definitely going to be the next. We were just talking there a second ago about clinics focusing on rec, but there's definitely going to be a tension point around how those
Lounges,
consumption
yeah.
lounges frame themselves and what that looks like. But yeah, just to pick up on the point you made on the previous story, I think our position is this industry needs patience. We need patience, and I think if you want to see the market grow, you've got to get the numbers in, and that is an innovative way to see the market grow. Might not be everyone's cup of tea, might stress a few people out, but ultimately
But
the
what,
UK is
yeah,
way behind where it should be in terms of numbers, and it would be
anything
great to get that message out more.
anything that increases patient numbers is something that we will support.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
feel like that leaves us in a good place to end this week's show.
Yeah, that ends the show.
That is our position.
Yeah, mic
Yeah,
drop.
let us know your thoughts. Like, subscribe, comment, debate us. Any of the above. Yeah, and see you guys next time.
Nice one. See you next time. Cheers for watching.